Majority people cannot control diabetes because they don't know how to control. Some people know, but still they don't use the technique. So if you have diabetes, then watch the video completely, otherwise you will miss. So hello my dear friends, welcome back to my channel. Let's get started. So first of all, let me tell you that there are two types of diabetes. One is type 1, another is type 2. Apart from this, there are some other types of diabetes also, like maturity onset diabetes of young, like MODY or gestational diabetes. But these are separate things. Basically, we have type 1 and type 2. Now, what is the pathophysiology? In type 1 diabetes, there is autoimmune destruction of beta cell of pancreas. In our pancreas, there is beta cell which produces insulin, which is a hormone. This insulin helps to take this blood sugar inside the cell, which is very important for generating energy. So, in case of type 1 diabetes mellitus, what happens? There is insulin deficiency. Why? Because this beta cell destruction happened because of autoimmunity. So, due to autoimmune destruction of beta cell of the pancreas, there is no insulin, or very less amount of insulin, so that due to lack of insulin, our body cannot take glucose, cell cannot take glucose, so that we don't get energy. Because what will happen when you take some food, then food enter into the stomach intestine, then it will absorb, and after absorption it will go to the blood, and then what will happen when it circulate throughout the body, then this glucose molecule which is present in the blood, it will go inside the cell. So glucose molecule and oxygen, all these things will go inside the cell, and then there will be glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and all this method. Due to this, during all this method, there will be ATP formation or energy formation. So what will happen? One hormone, insulin, is responsible which is helpful during entering this glucose inside the cell. So if there is no insulin, there is no entry of the glucose inside the cell, there is no ATP formation, no energy, and it will be called diabetes. It is called diabetes. So in type 1, I have mentioned that there is autoimmune destruction of beta cell, but what about type 2? Type 2 diabetes, what will happen? There is insulin. Insulin is present. There is no deficiency. But the problem is insulin cannot work properly because the receptor which is responsible for working of the insulin, there is a problem in this receptor. It is called insulin resistance. Insulin is present, but it is not working properly. So in type 1 diabetes mellitus, the main problem is autoimmune destruction, and there is a genetic link also. So type 1 diabetes mellitus is basically genetic. So if parent having type 1 diabetes, then offspring may also have. And type 2 is basically mainly it is lifestyle oriented. Also, genetic factor is also present in type 2, but mainly lifestyle oriented. So in type 2 diabetes, it is basically not just imagine. So any sea or ocean, like Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean. So if you go to this place, then there is so much amount of water, but can you drink it? The answer is no. You can drink after purification, but without purification you cannot drink. So the thing is that there is huge amount of water, but you cannot drink it. So the similar thing happens inside our body. Like there is so much amount of glucose, you are eating food again and again. Your breakfast, lunch, dinner, every day you are eating foods. But you are taking glucose, this glucose enters inside your blood, but it is not able to go inside the cell. So in blood, it is accumulating inside the blood. It is accumulating in the blood. So the level of glucose is increasing in the blood, which is called hyperglycemia. But it is not able to go inside the cell and not able to produce energy. So you are not getting energy, you are feeling fatigue, and you are thinking that there is hyperglycemia, but why you are fatigued? You are feeling fatigue. So this is the reason. So in type 2 diabetes mellitus, there is insulin resistance. Insulin is present but not working, yeah, in the receptor site. So what will happen? So there is one concept known as saturated fat. So if you take too much amount of saturated fat, then this saturated fat will build up inside the cell, inside the muscle cell. So if saturated fat is present inside the cell, then too much amount of saturated fat leads to insulin resistance, because the receptor cannot work properly. Insulin cannot work properly if there is too much amount of intramyocellular lipid, because too much amount of this fat or lipid leads to metabolism, which produces one metabolite, diacylglycerol, and some reactions also leads to production of free radicals, which causes free radical injury to mitochondria. So this also leads to further insulin resistance. So too much amount of saturated fat is the main culprit. So one traditional concept is that if you have diabetes mellitus, then you should not consume too much amount of sugar. You should limit your sugar consumption. You should limit your simple carbohydrate consumption. You should limit your rice consumption. You should take less amount of carbohydrate if you have diabetes. And this is the common guideline many physicians give and many people know. I mean, majority people know this guideline. At least they know. They, I mean, whether they follow it or not follow it, I don't know it. But at least many people know it, that you should not consume too much amount of sugar. But do you know that you should not consume too much amount of saturated fat? Majority people don't know it, and majority physicians also don't give this advice that restrict your saturated fat, which is much more important than restriction of glucose or sugar, because you are taking sugar. I mean, simple carbohydrate is not good. I mean, whatever sugar or sucrose you are taking, this simple carbohydrate causes too much amount of sugar spike in the blood, rapid spike, which is not good. But I mean, taking rice or some other complex carbohydrate should not have too much amount of problem. So the basic idea is that already you have hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia can causes some other problems, like it is not good for your eye, causes diabetic retinopathy and some other problem as well. So it is understandable that if you have too much amount of hyperglycemia, then I mean controlling your sugar intake is understandable. But much more important, what is the much more important? Much more important is controlling your saturated fat, because if your saturated fat is present inside the cell, then insulin is not acting properly, and you are not consuming sugar. You are restricting your sugar intake, so you are not getting energy. Understand my point? So if you restrict your saturated fat intake, now what are sources of saturated fat? Saturated fat means number one culprit is your ghee and butter, whatever I have mentioned in previous video. Ghee, butter, and too much amount of milk consumption, too much amount of red meat consumption, these are all these culprit for diabetes. For anything, for diabetes, for hypertension, for any cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, any kind of modern diseases, these are culprit. So if you consume a saturated fat, then this saturated fat causes insulin resistance. So if you don't consume or restrict this saturated fat intake, then what will happen? There will be low amount of fat, or there will be no saturated fat inside the cell. So insulin can act properly. So insulin resistance is gone. Insulin can act properly, then again your glucose will enter inside the cell and ATP will be formed, and you will get the energy. So when suppose there is a lock, so it is a lock and it is the key of this lock. You see, it is the key. So I can close the lock and open the lock. So I can close the lock. So it has been closed, and now I can open also. So you see, now what will happen if there is chewing gum inside the lock? You see, here is the hole. So in this hole I can enter the key. So what will happen if there is chewing gum inside the hole and then the hole is not open, it is closed, then I cannot enter the key. So this key is, suppose that it is insulin and your lock is a cell. So if there is saturated fat, too much amount of saturated fat inside the cell, then insulin cannot work properly. If the hole is not open and it is there is so much amount of chewing gum, I cannot enter the key. But if the hole is open, there is no chewing gum or any other substance, then I can easily enter this key and close it or open it. So similarly, if there is no saturated fat inside the cell, then insulin can act properly and glucose can enter inside the cell. So when glucose will be utilized properly, then whatever your hyperglycemia, whatever the glucose accumulate inside in the blood, it will utilize because it will enter inside the cell. It will utilize, and hyperglycemia will, the problem will resolve. There will be no hyperglycemia. It will solve the problem. Problem will be solved. There will be no hyperglycemia. Glucose will be utilized properly. You will get the energy. And what next? There will be no diabetes. You can successfully prevent your diabetes. So there is one important step: restrict the amount of saturated fat. There will be no saturated fat. Insulin can act properly, and the glucose will enter inside the cell, and there is no diabetes. And apart from this, there are some drugs doctor prescribe. You can take these drugs. Sometimes insulin as well in very high situation. But the drugs, what these drugs do, they reduce gluconeogenesis. I mean, non-carbohydrate from non-carbohydrate to carbohydrate production, glucose production. So reduce gluconeogenesis. Some drugs reduce absorption of glucose, but these have side effects also. So I mean, proper amount of medication intake is very important during your acute problem. When you have diabetes, then you should take some medication. But if you apply this step, simple step, reduce amount of stress, reducing amount of saturated fat, then successfully you will be able to prevent your diabetes, and ultimately uh, you will enjoy your earlier life. I hope that you have understood this topic. Thank you for watching this video.